Okay, so now we've got some code in here. We might think, well, what else can we put in here in the way of code? Is there anything else we can do that's useful? And the answer is yes, lots of things. One thing to consider is that we have integers as the area in the population, and we're setting them down here, for example. But integers in Java can be negative, but areas and populations can't be. So we could put some code in. So instead of directly setting these things to values, we could use the code and do some checking. So here's something we might do for that. We could have a method called Now, the idea would be that, again, this is void, it doesn't return anything. It's called set area. Again, notice it begins with set. Again, it doesn't have to, but it's a convention. But this time we have a parameter, okay, which is the new area of this country that we are setting. And we might then do something like, oops, hang on a minute. I think we can assume that a country area has to be greater than 0. We could then do, so the idea would be down here, I'm just going to copy and paste this because I can't remember it. Then I would do the idea would then be, instead of directly setting the area as we're setting the population here, I call this method and I pass in the new value I want as a parameter. Up here we check to see whether it is actually greater than 0. We're not trying to set it as to a negative area, and if it is, we do set it there. Now, this obviously doesn't do anything if it is a negative area or if it's 0. We might not want to do that, but we could, for example, put or something like this. Now, printing out things in the middle of code is not normally a good idea, and in fact there are better ways of handling this. I'll show you one of them in a minute, but the best way is something that you'll get to in a later module in Java. The point is, though, we can actually do some checking. We're not restricted to simply accepting whatever number the user passes in or the code passes in. We can do some sanity checking on this. We can obviously do the same for population. I'll do population in a slightly different way. Now I'm going to say Boolean, and I'm going to write again into, this time I'm going to write population for reasons that become clear in a minute, and I'm now going to say if, again we'll assume that 0 populations are not allowed. We haven't seen the keyword this before. I'll explain what it means in a minute. So now, if we just stick to the test, so if the population is greater than 0, we set the population there and we return true, else we return false. So then down here we can do things like again, I'm going to copy and paste that. So we can check and say if not pop countries, i.e. if it's false, then there's been an error, and again we can print out let's get rid of that semicolon. So in this particular case, in the case of set area, then if we pass it a negative value or 0, then we'll get an error message generated from within set area. This version here doesn't do that. It basically says, well, okay, I'm not going to be responsible for printing anything. I'm just going to tell you whether it worked or not. If it worked, I'm going to return true. If it didn't, I'm going to return false. You're free down here to do what you like with it. And in this case, we said, right, we're going to set the population, and if it returns false, we're going to print out a message here. Okay. So either of these is completely reasonable approaches. There's nicer ways as we learn more about Java, but now we're stopping the user or any other code setting invalid values for population and area. I'm just going to explain what this means. I've deliberately used the same name here, population, as I've used here. Okay, so the parameter is called population, and the value we want to store it in is called population. Quite often you do want to use the same name. Here I actually had to think of, well, what else can I use? I'll call it new area, but really the sensible thing to do would be to call it area. But the problem then is that this has the same name as this, and that's ambiguous. To avoid that problem, when you want to do this, you can put the keyword this in front. So if you put this dot in front of a variable, you're saying, no, I want to refer to the one that belongs up here, not the one that's a parameter. It's quite a handy thing to be able to do in these contexts. So we've made some progress. We've stopped the user being able to set negative values for the area and the population. And in the next video we'll move on to something slightly more advanced.